It's 4 a.m. and a newspaper is slipped into a linen closet and reappears in a Mississippi barbershop. But why smuggle a headline? Well, during Jim Crow, many black newspapers were banned or seized. So Pullman porters created a covert network to smuggle the black press past sheriffs and railroad detectives, turning train routes into a national movement, all for the price of 2 cents. So join us today while we tell the story of how the Pullman Porters outsmarted Jim Crow. I'm your host, Country Born. This is One Mic Black History. If you like stories like this, you can find more stories like this at onemichistory.com. But without further ado, let's get started. The Chicago Defender began in 1905 with the promise to tell the truth that others buried, and it shouted it in ink and bold type. It named names, dates, counties when lynching went unpunished. It printed job ads from northern factories, addresses to rooming houses in the south side of Chicago, and even train schedules to get you there. It offered tips to finding a fair wage and a measure of dignity. In much of the South, that mix was dangerous. Sheriffs seized bundles, bosses fired anyone caught reading the Chicago Defender, and some towns tried to ban it outright, formally or informally. The Defender didn't just report the news, it advocated for the race and demanded American race prejudice be destroyed. It made the case unapologetically for mobility as leverage. These were the stakes. Reading the paper could cost you your job or worse. But under Jim Crow's chokehold, information was life. And if official channels told you no, how much were you willing to risk for the truth? So picture Chicago on a map with rails radiating down. The Illinois Central Railroad plunged through Chicago to Mississippi and then to Louisiana, with lines arcing through Alabama and Georgia and even snaking into western Texas. And these weren't just train routes, they were train schedules that could change your life. On board those trains were Pullman porters, black men in crisp uniforms, keeping America's sleeping cars pristine. George Pullman hired almost exclusively black men since the 1860s, many formerly enslaved, betting they would labor long hours for low pay and tips. The job demanded 20-hour days, 400 hours a month, or 1,000 miles just to make full pay. Porters covered their own uniforms and shoeshine kits and were often demeaned, expected to answer to George as if they belonged to the company's founder. Yet they worked in quiet dignity, and for all its humiliations, it was probably the best job in the community at the time, a ticket to a steady income, travel, and a middle-class standing. They were role models, black men that saw the country and brought the world back home. They also moved information. Porters memorized timetables like scriptures. With their little downtime, they tucked bundles into pillows, folded newspapers into garment bags, slid stacks under linens in service pantries. One porter boasted that he could flip a stack into a linen bag in 7 seconds. A porter might earn a tip for impeccable service and a small margin per copy for something way more valuable: the truth. The handoffs were like choreography, quick swaps at local stops, barbershop out of tracks, churches, or a Masonic lodge, beauty parlors and pool halls where information traveled faster than trains. Teachers and preachers and lodge stewards became the last mile. News agent. In one town, a preacher might become a newsstand, and another, a teacher's desk. Papers moved with a familiar nod and perhaps a code word. This was all because the risks were constant. Papers like the Chicago Defender were banned in many southern towns. Sheriffs knew exactly what they were looking for, and railroad detectives watched for suspicious packages. Wartime secession laws and postal bans gave officials cover to thieves. Incendiary literature and Klansmen sometimes would lay in wait. Getting caught meant being arrested, or beating, perhaps losing your job, or much, much worse. But There's a price tag that most people miss. This wasn't just about courage, it was a business model. The Defender co-signed bundles to local agents. In the South, that price rose a bit within reach of folks who pooled their money together, and passing along readership multiplied that impact. One copy read aloud in a barbershop, then passed to a deacon, to a teacher, then to a cousin. By the week's end, a single issue could touch a dozen hands. But what actually moved in those bundles? The paper turned the idea of leaving into a plan. During World War I, when European immigration cratered and the northern factories were hungry for labor, the Defender ran classified ads for steel mills, stockyards, packing houses, restaurants, domestic work wages printed right next to the address, and crucially, train schedules for how to reach them. Yes, they were dangerous jobs, but they offered something that the South could not give you. Pay hit every single Friday and work where no boss called you boy. Then came the Great Northern Drive of 1917. Robert Abbott's call for 1 million people to leave the South. It's set to a specific date, May 15th. The Chicago Defender wasn't selling fantasy, it was selling logistics. It told you what to pack, what to expect, when to leave, and which stations to watch for. It named the cause plainly. White supremacy, violence, and disenfranchisement was the engine for the exodus. It ran photo essays contrasting the modern, comparatively integrated Chicago High School with the Shack School in Abbeville, Louisiana, searing this comparison into readers' minds. It posted letters from new arrivals in Chicago and Detroit with quotes like, "The air is cold, the rent is high, but the paycheck clears and no one calls me George." Then it kept the newspaper scorching with investigations that others refused to print. Lynchings, assaults, disenfranchisement, naming names, dates, and counties. Headlines blared in red ink. Graphic images demanded attention. Sometimes the Defender reprinted anxious columns from Southern newspapers now fretting about the loss of labor under the jab of the South getting told. The voice would be blunt to the point of being unforgettable. If you could freeze to death in the North and be free, why freeze to death in the South and be a slave? The effects were immediate. Families clipped job ads and tucked them into Bibles. Men memorized station names and times of their departure. A woman might slip a Southside rooming house address into her apron, waiting for Wednesday's train departure. Churches and lodges anchored mass meetings with Defender stories. "We are not alone," the preacher might say, holding up the paper. Mutual aid funds grew. Train fare funds started appearing in collection plates. In some towns, the excitement bordered on mania. Wagons were left standing in the street when word spread of the good jobs hiring up north. And for the Defender, by 1917, it was the first black paper to hit 100,000 weekly circulation. By 1920, it reached 230,000. Passing along that readership expanded 4 or 5 times over. By World War I, more than 2/3 of its readers actually lived in the city of Chicago. So how does a sheriff choke off a newspaper he can't find? He can seize a stack at a station, but he couldn't stop 1,000 whispers and 1,000 barbershops. And this movement was led by a few men who made this all possible. Robert Abbott, who was the creator of the Chicago Defender, was a strategist as much as a publisher. He didn't just write editorials, he timed them. Press runs aligned with Saturday departures so that Sunday morning, a deacon in Selma, Alabama, could read fresh headlines at the pulpit. Abbott's newsroom knew the rails as well as any conductor. Then there was Philip A. Randolph and the Brotherhood of the Sleeping Car Porters when they arrived in 1925. The porters had been organizing quietly for years, but now they flexed their power in the open. The Defender amplified their struggle with updates, editorials, wins, setbacks, and when the union finally won federal recognition in 1937. It wasn't just a labor victory. It solidified the very network that moved the paper for decades. The men who could map a route to Jackson could also map a route to justice. Through it all, the backlash never let up. Seizures, arrests, employers sniffing out troublemakers and firing them. But their suppression kept failing because the target constantly moved. The defender's distribution wasn't a warehouse, it was motion mixed with trust. You shut down one barbershop, a lodge stepped in. Patrol one depot, handoff slid to a town further down the line. The sheriff could not outrun a timetable. So, why doesn't this matter? Because the payoff was plain and simple. In the era of bans and fear, mobility and trust created a shadow circulation system. Pullman porters didn't just deliver the newspaper, they delivered a movement and a map. The Defender became an infrastructure. A paper turned into a pipeline where routes weren't just steel, they were relationships. They were barbers, deacons, and teachers, and lodge stewards and porters, all acting on time. Later, the Black Press networks copied that playbook and kept the information moving. Today's social media feeds are a reward of what the rails taught us. Speed and trust and local hubs. Your aunt share, your barber's take, that digital echo of the Sunday Circle with the Defender echoing his voice across the nation. Thank you. This has been One Mic Black History. I'm your host, Country Boy. If you like stories like this, you can find more stories like this at onemichistory.com. Also, I have a Substack. I've included a link below. I create notes about Black history every single day and write articles every single Thursday. I would like to thank all my day ones and my financial contributors. I love you all. Thank you. Peace.